But today, Vikram's going to be talking about the drought-tolerant landscapes and plants that are well adapted for our crazy weather conditions we get here. And he's from Lubbock, and they get how many inches of rainfall a year? Like 10?
Well, more like 18.
Like
but
18 inches.
It depends on the year.
Per year, and you should be there on the day that it falls. It's intense.
It's intense.
Yeah. So it is.
No, yeah.
He is extremely. If he says really good things, that's stuff that he learned at A&M. If he says stuff that's wacky, that's stuff that he learned at Tech.
At Tech, yeah.
But he's a pro, so this is going to be awesome, and we're going to get started.
All right, y'all. Thanks for coming out. I know I've seen like several of you all have been here all day, and that's awesome. So thanks for coming. It's been a lot of fun. I hope you've had time to explore the nursery and get something to eat and all of that. I'm talking directly into my own ear, but that's okay. It's fine. So we're going to talk about drought-tolerant, water-conserving landscapes. I have a short 120 slides for you to look at. So I'm not really. But I am a professor. I teach intro horticulture, vegetable crops, fruit and nut crop production. My background, my undergrad is in landscape design from Texas A&M. My master's was in... It never completely goes away. You get the... It's fine. My master's was in olive trees, and I studied oil production and drought tolerance in olives in South Texas. And then my PhD was in urban water conservation. So I've done a little bit of everything. I ran a landscape company for a couple of years. I've been an extension agent. And then now I've been working at Tech for 7 years ish. So a little bit of everything in horticulture. So we're going to talk about water conserving landscapes, because even though y'all have gotten just an absurd amount of rain in the last 6 weeks in this area, that's probably not the norm, right? You'll get a couple inches a month, but I think in our part of Texas, this sort of latitude in Texas, dry is more common than wet, and we go through long periods of drought. And so when we talk about that and we talk about how some of these principles work in the landscape, it's solid just for anything, right? For any time. These are things that'll work on wet years, dry years, anything in between. So we'll talk about just some basic design principles and some basic things that we can talk about. And like Tom earlier was saying, he gives a lot of presentations, so I have to have an outline. Like it's an occupational hazard. I don't know how to not do that. So we'll talk about xeriscapes. We'll talk about why it's important to conserve water briefly. I think we all know that. We'll talk about the 7 design principles and then look at some favorite plants. I'm going to go through some of this pretty quick. But if there's questions you have or anything you'd like me to spend more time on, please let me know, okay? Is anyone here from Lubbock? Okay. So I always ask, is this anyone's landscape before I start talking about it, okay? This was a former, like a neighbor's house where my wife and I would walk when my son was little. And it's okay, right? Cow skulls grow real slow, regardless of how much you water them. They are technically drought tolerant. You can put as many as you want. There are a lot of rocks. And this is, I think, when people think xeriscape, this is what they think of, right? Oftentimes, rocks, cow skulls, gravel, the kinds of things that you would see either on Mars, somewhere we're going to have to rescue Matt Damon from, or just the desert Southwest, right? So this is fine if you like this. There's nothing wrong with this. But as we start thinking about it, and as we go through this presentation, I'm going to show you some examples of what else a xeriscape can look like and some of the materials, because it turns out canopy cover, plant canopy, is really good at helping to conserve water, helping to reduce temperature, and all of those things make our lives in urban environments a lot better, okay? One of the best, it's more humid here than it is back home, but I always tell people one of the best things about living in West Texas is when the sun goes down, it cools off 25 degrees, right? At low humidities, it gets cool at night. If you have lots of rock like this, it sits all out in the sun all day and absorbs heat and then radiates it back at night, so you lose your cooling effect. We were talking about tomatoes earlier and how they don't, like if they're not setting fruit or flower, sometimes the radiative effect of just lots of hardscape and lots of concrete makes that worse. It makes it harder for your tomatoes to set fruit. And so we need to think about how do we cover up the soil, how do we fill in some of those bare spaces. So just real briefly, water is a limited landscape or resource, right? Now, if you look at a global scale, water's pretty consistent. We have about the same amount of water on the planet all the time. The dinosaurs did. Whatever comes next after us will. However, it moves around. Okay, so just because the overall mass of water doesn't change, it doesn't mean that it's available for you and me all the time right now. Yeah?
Fun fact about that, every ounce of water was one time dinosaur pee.
That's exactly right. The dinosaurs drank it at some point. It's well filtered over a long time. They talk about the original, like, reclaimed water, right? But we have to know that it moves. It evaporates, it blows somewhere else. We always joke in Lubbock that if we're not careful with how we use our water, it's going to evaporate and blow to Dallas. And they have enough cool things. So, like, we want to keep the water where it is supposed to be with us, where we can use it. This is just, I'm not going to go into this too much. This is honestly just talking about aquifers. But everywhere you see a red dot on here, or a big red streak, if you can see that, is a sinkhole. That's somewhere that a sinkhole opened up. And that's because we've over-extracted from underground water sources, and those aquifers are collapsing. We see a lot of it in parts of California, especially Northern California, through parts of New Mexico, a lot through the Appalachian Mountains, where we over-extract, especially from rocky aquifers, and then once they cave in, they can't fill back up. And so we have to be careful with how we use water, because once they dry out, sometimes they're dry, right? And so when we think about water resources, a lot of it comes from surface water. And I was looking at this map. This is from a really cool website called Water Data for Texas. And if you're ever curious about how full your reservoirs are, check this out. And this is just a static picture. But you can sort of, and this is actually an old one from a few weeks ago, all of your reservoirs around Wichita Falls are blue right now. They're like 99% or more full because you've had such great rainfall the past few weeks. But if you're ever curious, oh man, it's been a drought, I'm curious, I want to see how our water supply is doing, this website will show you every reservoir in the state of Texas and how full it is. So when we think about the landscape, and to get back to the whole plant thing, right? About 40 to 60% of residential water consumption goes outside, goes in the yard. The most recent numbers I've seen in the United States, we use about 140 gallons of water per person per day across the country, right? That's for everything. That is for showering, that's for washing our clothes, for cooking, for everything else that we do. Some of those things, and I'll be honest, some of those numbers include other stuff based on lifestyle. They talk about like the water that goes into the extraction of oil and all those different things. But call it about 140 gallons per person per day. 40 to 60% of that goes out to the landscape. And in some cases in the US, if you have a lot of turf grass and full sun, like a lot of lawn, you may use 6,000 to 10,000 gallons of water per month just on your lawn. Okay, that's sort of a lot of water. And when we think about paying for water, that's money you're spending, right? But it's also a resource that we sort of share that we're spending. So when we get to water conservative or drought tolerant landscape design, what we're really thinking about is not just rocks and cactus, but how do we cover the soil? How do we generate more canopy cover with the plants that are well adapted for an area that aren't going to take a lot of additional resources? They did a research project up in Kansas about 15 years ago looking at the cooling effect of plants, right? How much did, as they release water vapor to the atmosphere, how much do they cool the area around them? Because that's one of the reasons they do it, is to keep themselves cool. So 1,000 square feet of canopy cover, whether that's lawn, whether that is plants in your garden or anything else, plants in general, produces about the same amount of cooling as a 1-ton AC unit. So if you have 3,000-4,000 square feet of canopy cover in your yard, you're producing the same cooling effect outside as your AC is inside. They did a study where in one house or one study area, they took all the plants out and put in rocks. Another one, they put in plants, they turned off the AC inside. The one with the plants around it was 10 degrees Fahrenheit cooler inside than the one without any plants. So it cools the outside of the structure enough to cool it inside. That's a big deal when we think about paying for energy, when we think about being 10 degrees outside, okay, fine. 10 degrees in your house, the difference between 75 degrees in your house and 85 degrees in your house, That's a big deal. That's like moving to a different house. Like if my house was 85 all the time, I'm like, I'm not staying in this house. But so we have to be able to cool things off. So this is also a water conservative landscape. Okay? It doesn't have to be rocks and cow skulls. And I don't know how well you can see this. It's kind of bright out here, but it's just about plants, right? These are all plants. If you really start to look at this, we have salvias, we have different ornamental grasses, we have sage, we have a lot of different things that in a Texas climate would do well on pretty much native rainfall, right? You may have to supplement at certain times, even if you have to get them established, but by and large, like, they're going to take care of themselves. So when we think about that and we think about how do we save water in the landscape, honestly, it comes down to good plant choices. It comes down to plants that are not just native, but native and well adapted to a climate. Now, native plants are something that I'm a big proponent of. If it grows and if it's adapted and evolved in your area, it can take the climate. But something I think it's important to understand is that your home landscape is not a native landscape, right? Because of trees, because of shade, because of the way that we change the soil. So a plant that, like, if you drive by in a field and this plant looks fine or it looks not good or whatever, you take it home and you put it in your yard, it's going to behave differently. That doesn't mean that it's going to be bad. That just means that you have different considerations when you're in an urban landscape. So there's 7 main principles we go with when we talk about water conserving landscapes. We start with a good design, limit lawn areas. That doesn't mean get rid of lawn. I studied grass a lot, actually, for better or worse. And there are ecosystem benefits. There are social benefits to having a lawn. My kid needs somewhere to go run around and kick a soccer ball. My dog likes somewhere to go to the bathroom. Like, I have lawn in my home. It's just limited, right? I've reduced the amount of lawn. Amending your soil, using mulch, efficient irrigation, good maintenance, and then selecting drought-tolerant plants. And if you can follow these principles, you can really be very successful on a limited water budget. So start with a good design. I'm going to tell you, I'm not going to read all of these things to you, but the 2 things that you can do that will give you the best landscape design, in my opinion, are to identify what you're going to use different parts of your yard for, right? I had a client one time when I was landscaping that the landscape was a mess. It needed a lot of help, which was good for me. That's you know, career security in a landscape when people, you know, need help with their landscape. But she had prickly pear cactus and tomatoes in the same bed. Just let that sit for a second. Have you ever met a prickly pear cactus, like, up close? That's the gift that keeps giving, right? So for one, she was either always overwatering her cactus or underwatering her tomatoes. There was no way not to do that. 2, I don't want to harvest a fruit that's even looked at a prickly pear cactus, right? I don't want to be anywhere near it. So thinking about the usage of your landscape, and okay, this is a good turf area. This is a good native landscape area. This is my vegetable garden. These are my cacti. And really sectioning things off, 1, makes the use of your landscape a lot better, but 2, it lets you irrigate appropriately, right? You can turn off the water to your cacti beds, to your native plant beds, and then spend that water resource where it counts on your vegetables and different things, and you're not overwatering or over-fertilizing one thing at the detriment of something else, right? And this is a pretty nice example. I like the way this is done. There's some raised beds in here. There's walking paths. If you look close, again, I may be a little hard to see. Back in the back, they have agave. They have some native flowers. They have some native grasses, some cacti. Over here, they have some things like salvias and other plants that are drought tolerant but need a little more water. And I've actually seen a second picture of this landscape that I couldn't find when I was putting this together. Around this corner, they have a vegetable garden, but all the vegetables are together. So it's very sectioned off. And we call that hydrozoning. If you can hydrozone effectively, the plants that are in a bed are all watered the same way, or fertilized the same way, or managed similarly, you're going to be so much happier. You'll save a lot of time, and you'll save a lot of resources in your landscape.
Sorry, I see a sable in that picture, so that's great.
Oh, good. I'm glad to hear it. So they're doing it right. Yeah, they've done a good job. Use soil amendments. Get a soil test. Like, some people don't like to do it. Get a soil test, okay? You need to know what's down there before you start amending your soil. This is a little bit different if you're gardening in raised beds or containers because you know what you're putting into it, right? But if you're trying to work in a field soil, the soil in your backyard, we joke a lot that the average person fertilizes their yard by buying 2 bags of fertilizer and putting one in the front yard and one in the backyard. When a single bag is supposed to do like 10,000 square feet of lawn or garden space, right? And even with that, if you don't know what's there, if you don't know what's wrong with your soil, you can't treat it, right? It's just like if you're not feeling good and you go to the doctor and they do a blood test, they can tell you what's going on to a certain extent and you can correct it. It's a similar concept here. If you know what's in the soil, you can amend appropriately. The things I will always encourage people to do is add organic matter, right? Compost, mulch. Do things and put things in the soil that support insects, microorganisms, break down and build up your soil, nutrients. It's good. Like I can think of very, very few reasons not to do that, right? And those are vastly outweighed by the benefits you get from adding organic matter to the soil, okay? So even in my lawn, every year I'll go out I don't fertilize my lawn much. I'll fertilize once. I think I've fertilized like with a spreader once in the last 2 years. Because I mulch all my clippings. I don't bag my clippings. That is free nutrients. You can actually meet 25 to 30% of the nutrient requirement of your lawn just by mulching your clippings back into the lawn. And then I'll buy compost at the beginning of the season and just top dress over my lawn with about a 1/4 inch of compost. Water it in. As that breaks down, it builds up my soil. And I do regular soil tests every year, every 2 years. And if I have to add anything, it's very, very little, right? Just good management will make you a lot more resilient, a lot more successful in your landscape. Yeah?
So, example, like our lawn is kind of like how the grass is like here.
Yeah.
Would you do the compost and what type of amount of water and grass seed would be required?
So the question is if like your lawn is a little sparse, right? It's patchy, there's gaps in there. You may even go down with a heavier compost layer at first, maybe a 1/2 inch. You can even go a little deeper. Depending on what type of grass you have, adding seed at that time, you could add seed and then compost over it. For one, that gives you a lot of nutrients and a lot of moisture for your grass seed to come up. It also keeps the birds off of it. And so if you just spread grass seed on the surface, a lot of times the birds get it before it can germinate. But if you compost and top dress over it, that'll help. Watering is a little more complicated. It depends on the time of year. So for example, if you're using Bermuda grass, let me just go with an easy one. It's really common around here, right? Really common through Texas. Once it's established, you can get away with less than 1 inch of water per week on your Bermuda grass. Establishing it, you need to keep it wet. Little baby grass plants will dry out in a hurry. So water, once a day, depending on how hot it is. If there are irrigation ordinances in play, usually you can apply for a variance. You send in the form, say, hey, I'm establishing a new lawn, and they'll let you water a little bit more for a while. Usually 2 to 3 weeks is enough to get it established. Start cutting back, do your first mowing about 6 weeks in, and then you should be good to go. So,
Okay, when I talk a lot with native plant people and people online, there's a lot of folks that say, don't amend your soil because it's got to learn to live with your native soil that you have. So when you're planting a plant, don't mix in compost around it, or it's just going to live right there in the compost and not ever spread its roots out. Talk to us about that.
So that's actually a really good question. When we think about tree planting, a lot of times people want to put different things back in the hole. I always tell people go back in with what you pulled out, right? So if you dig up a field soil, go back in with the same stuff. I actually don't mix in compost into my planting holes. I top dress with it. The difference there is when you get a root establishment, a lot of times they're sort of right? Like the roots will go through an easy, loose compost and then they hit your sometimes compacted field soil and then they turn, just like they're in a pot. So when you think about root establishment, especially in woodies and perennials and trees, you actually do want to fill back in with what you pulled out. But if you top dress with a compost, then microorganisms and earthworms and beetles and stuff will eat that and naturally pull it down into the soil. They work it in a more consistent, sort of ecologically friendly way. Now, if you have like a super compacted soil, sometimes it's not a terrible idea to work in a little bit of compost at planting, but there is something to that, where native plants, if you amend heavily, they don't ever establish like they quote unquote should, because you've made it a little too easy on them. In some cases you can do that and just cut back on the water a little bit and stress them out, and that really pushes root development. So that's a good question. I do get yelled at about that too online. People get mad about stuff, like just really mad about stuff. I don't know. And it's usually like stuff that shouldn't be controversial, like compost is good for your yard. How dare you, right? Yeah.
Oftentimes I try to do that, but our backyard, I dig like 6 inches in the ground and to get the nasty gray wet clay. There's no putting that back down the hole.
Yeah, sure.
It's like 80 pounds per square foot.
Yeah.
So I have to do almost 100%.
Well, that's a good point too. That's going to depend largely on soil type. He was saying he has like a heavy gray clay soil, wet all the time, right? Just soup, and not the good kind. And so, like, yeah, sometimes you don't have a choice. You have to go back in with an amended soil or a bagged soil if you ever want to give your plant a chance of surviving. Otherwise, you're essentially just sitting it in a 5-gallon bucket full of water.
That's correct.
Right?
It's not really like soup. It's more just like stuck together, like a block of clay you buy.
Like a wet clay.
It's literally
Yeah, like a block of clay you buy to make like.
That's
pasta
terrible
soup.
soup. Yeah. Yeah.
Solid soup. Though.
Solid soup. Okay. Which is objectively the worst kind of soup. No, you're right though. Like it just gets so dense and it's waterlogged all the time.
Does that ever actually break down? Like, can you make that actually go and break down, or is it all, or is that kind of clay always going to be like that?
It is hard to change the soil structure of heavy clay like that. It's possible. Some people will add sand a little bit to break that up. Compost can help with that, or organic matter can help. But when you have something that is just like a solid clay, a heavy clay, you can amend it, but it's hard. It's a long process. And it's always going to want to revert back to that because that's sort of the natural state of it. So you'll always fight it. So in those cases, yeah, I would say amend your soil, add stuff in the hole for sure. So, trying to watch my time. Okay, we're okay. So generally, because of this, limit lawn areas, right? Don't get rid of your lawn. I like having a lawn. A lot of people like their lawn. There's nothing wrong with that. Just be sensible about it. Keep it in places you're going to use it. Keep it in places you want it. But like nobody really, I mean, there's always a weird spot in your yard that you have lawn that you wish you did it, right? Because you just have to mow it and it's hard to mow, whether it's the strip of, the little strip, we call them parkways or hell strips between the sidewalk and the street. I hate mowing that. It doesn't serve any purpose except that I have to mow it and be angry. Right? Sometimes I do it just to feel something. And replacing that with something else is a good choice, right? Yeah?
Do you set up some sort of barrier to prevent grass from spreading, or do you just kill it some time of year?
Oh, like into flower beds and stuff?
Yeah, grass will go everywhere.
It does.
It takes like a week to mow on grass. We have to mow where it spreads everywhere.
Yeah. I will set up barriers to a certain extent. I don't really bury them deep. You can, like, if you go down 12 inches and they sell grass barriers and stuff, they keep the rhizomes from spreading. It kind of works. I use like metal edges or just something hard that I can weed eat up against or mow up against. That at least gives me a hard line that I can maintain against. And if I have to spray something to kill it, I can use that as sort of a block that I set up my cardboard on or whatever to get a nice spray edge. So yeah, I do use barriers. Or like landscape fabric, things like that. I'm not a huge fan of, usually because they work for a little while and then they are a mess, right? I think it's better to manage other ways through either heavy mulching, lasagna mulching, using cardboard, paper, things like that, that's going to break down in the soil and you can plant into. Like woven weed fabric. It has its places, especially if you're gonna like cover an area and then put down a raised bed or gravel on top of it, that's okay. But if you're really gonna be planting into it, it just is such a pain to deal with, in my experience. We'll skip through a couple of these. Most of these just say have less lawn. This one is interesting to me. This is, you can replace, in some cases, areas of lawn with patios, with other things you use for other things, right? This, and again, I don't know how well you can see it. This is my friend's side yard. And it's, 8-10 feet wide. It was just grass. It always looked bad, and he always hated mowing it. So he took it all out, built a little deck, put a grill in, put in some stepping stones and some pavers, and it was a nice little entertaining space and a cool focal point in his yard after that. Mulch. This is 3 slides that just says you should mulch. Like, I'm a college professor. I can't do anything briefly, but just add mulch. Use mulch. Different kinds of mulch are fine. Bark mulch is usually what I like. I prefer a finely shredded bark mulch that's not going to float away. If you live somewhere where there's not heavy rain, like something like a pine bark is okay, but pine bark will want to move down the street, right? You get a big rain, floats away. So I'll use like a shredded cypress or a shredded cedar, depending on what I can get. I actually looked this up before this. You can get from a lot of municipalities, larger municipalities, free mulch in some cases. I'm a little wary of that. Like in Lubbock, you can go to the landfill and they'll just be like, how much do you want? And you just load it up. You don't know where that came from, right? That could be trees that died from disease. That could be, you don't know. Sometimes, like, if a piece of treated lumber ends up in there, they're like, shred that too, whatever. If you're going to use that stuff, I recommend solarizing it, composting it for a little while to heat it up, kill any pathogens. And even at that, I usually use it for walking paths and not around my plants. You want a fairly clean source of mulch that you know is not going to spread disease or seeds from weeds or whatever. Okay, but mulch is good. Probably one of the biggest things is use efficient irrigation. There's new technology in irrigation that is so much better, right? Drip line is your most efficient. If you have a drip line down, that's like 95% plus efficient. What I mean by that is if you pay for a gallon of water, 95% of it goes to where you want it to go, right? The old pop-up and spray sprinkler heads that everyone's seen, right? They put out that cone of water. Depending on pressure, they're like 40% efficient, okay? If you're real close to the water tower and you don't have a pressure regulator, it's way worse. They're designed to work at like 40 PSI, and a lot of times those systems run 80, 85. So they're using way more pressure. They're making way too small of a droplet. They're real inefficient. Drip line's the best. Now they have things called multi-stream rotors that put out water in a stream. It's a bigger droplet. They apply water more slowly, but they apply it at like 85% efficiency. So you have to run it longer, but it's a lot more efficient. Yeah?
What are your thoughts on rainwater harvesting?
Yes, do it. I'm all very pro rainwater harvesting.
Is there a reason why there's states that don't allow you to do it? Like it's actually illegal?
Yeah, there's a couple of states that have, Oregon has some laws against it. Colorado has a couple of weird laws. Most of that is right to capture related. So the mentality behind a lot of that is that water belongs not just where it falls, but downstream. And so when they think about the Colorado River and the Rio Grande, they're like, well, this water, if you catch it, doesn't end up back in the waterway. I don't agree with that. That's just sort of how it is. There are some ways around that. Some of the ways those laws have been rewritten in the past 5-10 years is that if once it hits the ground, it's public property, right? But if you can catch it, so like in the ground, like, sometimes we use catch basins and stuff that run down, that they say is public property, but if you can catch it like off the roof of the structure, you're, sometimes in better shape. But they have changed a lot of those laws. In Texas, we are pro rainwater harvesting. You can actually get on the Texas Comptroller website and download tax forms and buy most of the stuff you need for a rainwater harvesting system sales tax free. And they do a drought-tolerant landscape weekend sometimes where all that plants and stuff will be.
That was Memorial Day.
Memorial Day. Okay, we just missed it. Wait till next year. But I am a big proponent of rainwater harvesting. The water quality is better, and it just falls out of the sky, right? So, by the way, if you're thinking about numbers, like how much water can I really catch, on 1,000 square feet, an inch of rain is 625 gallons. Okay, so if you think about, you've got a 2,000 square foot roof space plus your yard and everything, In a couple inches of rain, you're catching thousands of gallons of water. Michael was saying earlier, they catch like 500,000 gallons of water off of their roof structures in an inch of rain. So like it's a substantial amount of water. And otherwise it ends up hitting a pavement, ending up in a sewer somewhere, right? We would rather use it on our plants, put it back in the soil. I'm going to skip through a couple of these just for the sake of time. Practice good maintenance. A healthy plant is a drought-tolerant plant, right? If you have even a native species, even a well-adapted species, and you don't take good care of it, it's going to use more water trying to survive than if it's healthy and well cared for. Be appropriate and thoughtful about your fertilizer use, irrigation timing, pest management, all the things that go into keeping your plants healthy, okay? And then my favorite part of this is selecting drought-tolerant plants. I'm a plant nerd, right? Like, I grew up in the prairie of okay, it should be a prairie, it's mostly farmland. But the prairies of West Texas on the high plains, right? And I love native species and I love plants. But sometimes they're not accessible, sometimes you can't find them all in the nursery trade. These guys have a great selection of native plants and drought-tolerant plants here. And so, like, if you're looking for things for your yard, they pretty much have you covered. My biggest thing that I think about when I think about drought-tolerant plants is you can find a native or drought-tolerant plant to fill any niche in your landscape, any design aesthetic in your landscape. If you want a small flowering tree for your yard that is drought-tolerant, that does well in our soils, you know, magnolias do okay, dogwoods are going to struggle, but a vitex is going to be great. A desert willow is going to hang in there, right? They're great, tough plants. You can find a well-adapted species to fit almost anything in the landscape. Yeah?
I laugh, I'm sorry, because when I post a picture of my vitex, I get all the native people who attack me.
People get mad about vitex too.
They go, it's like 10 posts about it, and I'm like, guys, please.
No, it's fine.
It's insane.
I am also pro vitex.
They're incredible for pollinators.
No, our bees love it. They're great.
You just have to watch them, right? And the newer ones, like the newer varieties, are usually sterile, so they're not going to be weedy and invasive. Some of the old ones, you get a little weediness on. There is a coastal vitex that is a lot more aggressive in terms of the way it reseeds. But the Vitex agnus castus, there's a Japanese vitex also that is very aggressive. But the chase tree that you see around here, you may pull out a couple of seedlings every now and then, but they're A-okay, in my opinion. And I'm pretty sensitive about invasive plants, right? I am opposed to planting invasive plants, but I'm fine with them.
But if it actually was an invasive plant, Michael couldn't sell it.
Oh, that's true.
So it's not an invasive.
So some of my favorites, I'll go through these pretty quick in no particular order, okay? I love red yuccas, okay? There's red ones and there's yellow ones. They're also still red yuccas, but they're yellow. It does, you know, we get stuck in a thing. This is what it's called. I don't care what anyone says. It could be whatever color. Just like there's all colors of blue bonnets, but they're still blue bonnets, okay? Red yucca is tough as nails. It'll grow in most soils. It will get about this tall, puts a bright red flower spikes, really good for pollinators. Hummingbirds love it, butterflies love it, bees love it because it's a large flower. They will spread a little bit. You got to stay on top of them just a little bit, but they usually mound, right? They're not going to seed out heavily, but they'll kind of get big. When they do, you can divide them. Give them to your friends.
There's new varieties that are dwarf.
Oh, that's cool.
Is a dwarf. It only gets like 2 feet tall and brighter red blooms. And so in a smaller landscape, it's wonderful.
That's awesome. They make great, so brake lights. I'm going to have to write that one down because I need that for my yard actually. But a lot of times they are great like accent plants or focal point plants because they get pretty big. They're showy. As far as ornamental grasses, there are some that'll be real aggressive and spread on you. One of my favorites is Lindheimer's muley. A lot of muley grasses are great. They tend to be fairly well behaved. It's not like Mexican feathergrass where if it's in your yard and you call your friends, they have it in their yard too, right? Like it naturalizes readily. This one is tall. It has really nice awns on it or inflorescences on it, and it makes a great border and a great background in your landscape. One of my very favorite plants is the Blackfoot daisy. for a Texas landscape. I love Blackfoot daisies. In my master's degree, I actually did some wildflower research. My major advisor, even though I was studying olives, her work was in wildflowers. And so we would go out and do seed collecting around West Texas and then do research on these wildflowers. So in 2011, which if you've been in Texas in a while, that was on the back end of our crazy drought. We had like 4 inches of rain in my area all year. It's awful. We were out seed collecting, and we were all like, why are we doing this? It hasn't rained in a year and a half. There was some out on a little rock outcropping in 1/2 inch of soil, perfectly happy, but flowering, doing the thing. They are so tough. They're a great perennial. Sometimes you don't get more than 3 or 4 years out of them before you either have to like refresh them. Sometimes cutting them back helps, but you get enough interest out of them that I think they're a great plant. Gaillardia, sometimes you'll see this called Indian blanket or wheel of fire. There's a lot of different colors. This is probably more the native color. Texas Tech, as a shameless plug, has a release of this that's like Raider Red, and it's like a deep crimson red. It's kind of hard to find, but it's beautiful. I'm sure there's a maroon one. We do that at A&M too. You can buy maroon bluebonnets if you really want to. Gara, dancing butterfly, is a great Texas native. There are the more native versions that are sort of tall and wispy, and then there's some like this Comanche pink or Apache pink that are a little more compact. Yarrow has a huge native distribution throughout the Americas. Honestly, from Mexico up into Canada, there's a native yarrow that grows in most places. The wild types tend to be white and kind of rangy, but there's some over here on Dez's table that's a beautiful red. There's one called Moonshine, which is one of the more popular varieties that's a bright yellow. You can get them in lavender. You can get them in a lot of colors. They're great pollinator plants, incredibly tough. Rosemary, as far as a border plant or a shrub for the landscape, they're one of the first things to bloom in the spring. They are, in theory, deer resistant. If a deer is hungry enough, it doesn't really care what you say about it. They don't read our textbooks. And so like when we say this is a deer resistant plant, the deer are like, okay, I'm gonna eat it anyway. I'll eat the textbook too. Roses. Okay, I famously kind of hate roses, and I'm gonna qualify this, okay? In my own landscape, I have a couple of roses that my granddad planted before he died, and I will do everything it takes to keep them alive forever, right? But in general, they're not some of my favorite landscape plants. However, some of the multiflora roses, some of the native roses throughout North America are incredibly tough. They smell good. Though they are susceptible to a lot of diseases, mostly they're foliar diseases that'll knock some leaves off and won't actually kill the plant, okay? Agave, century plants. There's several species of this. This is the Agave americana, the big one that we think of. But there's also Agave havardiana, 3 or 4 others that are great and more compact for the landscape. Desert willow is a wonderful tree. There are several varieties of this. Some of them are small to medium, 10, 15 feet tall. Some of them will get 30 feet tall, right? Wide range. These thrive on neglect. You plant them, you get them established, and you pretend they don't exist, and they'll be way happier. Water them if you happen to look at it one day. But usually native rainfall, they're perfectly happy. In fact, they will suffer if you overwater them. They don't like wet feet. You kind of just want to leave them alone. Vitex, we'll come back to this. I like it. Thank you. Yes. That's a round of applause for the maligned Vitex. One of my favorite larger shade trees is the lacebark elm. I'm a huge fan of the lacebark elm. Okay, they can be a little weedy. If you're not careful, they seed heavily. But I love this colorful shredding bark. The older they get, the more they do that. And this is a quick growing and surprisingly long-lived for as quickly as it grows shade tree. Yeah.
This should be common sense, I imagine. But are you a fan of like the edible type of like natives, so like blackberries and dewberries and all kinds of stuff like that?
Yeah. So the question was, am I a fan of edible natives?
Yeah.
So blackberries, raspberries. Absolutely. I think if you're
invasive to blackberries, don't read textbooks about where they should stay.
That's exactly right.
200 feet that way.
Yeah, blackberries, especially some varieties, especially the Himalayan blackberry is incredibly aggressive. But a lot of it's just because birds eat them too, and they'll pick up the seeds and spread them around. But yeah, dewberries, raspberries, they're wonderful. And they do so well in our heat and in our weird soil. Which ones don't? The raspberries don't. The blackberries are tough. Yeah, raspberries are tougher, but berries do pretty well. Buffalo grass, if we're looking for a native grass. There are a few species of native grasses in North America. Some of the best for Texas are buffalo grass, curly mesquite, and blue grama. Okay, and you can get some of these seed mixes. The nice thing about some of these native seed mixes is they'll get this tall and then stop. You know, you can mow them a couple times a year if you want to, or not. Bermuda grass is probably the most common lawn grass if you're going to go for that. It's drought tolerant. Y'all, it's aggressive. And so, like, if you're going to plant it, again, if you have a lawn in at least north of I-20, it's probably largely buffalo grass, or Bermuda grass, sorry. South of I-20, you get into some St. Augustine and a few other things, centipede grass in some places. This is tough as nails. Some of the improved varieties actually are more well-behaved. There's was it Black Diamond? No, that's all right. Celebration is a big one. There's a couple of others. Northbridge, there's a Tiff Tough and a couple of others that are partially shade tolerant, grow a more dense texture, and they stay short. And they're not going to as quickly take over your life and your home and your dog if it's too slow. People get mad at me at this one. Tall fescue. Oh no. Okay, so in the shade, in the right application, tall fescue can be just as drought tolerant as Bermuda grass. We have the data to back that up. If you put it in full sun, it will, in July, scream and burst into flames, right? Or you have to water it way more than you want to. But it's a cool season grass. It'll grow through the winter. It does just fine if you use it in the right application. So my take home from all of the plants, and there's such a long list. These are just some that I like. Pick the right plant for the right spot. If you do that, you'll be very successful in your landscape and very happy with your landscape. And it's not gonna like break the bank and take up all of your time, okay? So quick shameless plug, because that's my job. If you're interested in going back to school, if you're interested in learning more about horticulture, we have completely online degree programs in the Department of Plant and Soil Science. You can get a horticulture bachelor's and master's degree completely online at Texas Tech.
Do you have to actually like do work? Or?
Yeah, a little bit. You have to work a little bit. Mostly you just hang out and think about A&M, and you know, that would have been better there. But no, it's a great program. If you're interested in that, of course I didn't bring business cards because why would I to something like this? You can scan this, check it out, or my contact information's here. I'm an advisor in our department. I'm also an assistant dean in our college. I do outreach and engagement. So if you're ever interested in anything we do, let me know. I'm happy to answer questions. I wrote a book. I've got a few copies up here called Plants to the Rescue. It's a nonfiction children's book about how plants can help us solve some of our big challenges and just cool science stuff to get kids interested in plants. That's the biggest point. Short snippets of things that we're doing now and things that we might do in the future in plant science. So I am the plant prof all over the place. My podcast is called Plant-A-Palooza. Destin was on the most recent episode, so check that out. It was really fun. But I've taken up more time than I should, but I'll answer a couple of questions if anyone has any. You want to talk about Vitex more?
You said you would go back to it.
I said I would go back to it. I don't know. I like it. It's good. One thing I will say about Vitex, you can get them in different colors, right? Purple is the most common. There's a really nice white one as well, and you can get some pink varieties as well. So,
Flipside.
What?
Flipside.
What does that mean?
You haven't seen Flipside?
I haven't seen Flipside.
We have some here.
I'll have to go look at Flipside.
It's purple underneath the leaf.
Oh, that's cool.
A fun fact on Vitex, the Chased, I believe it is, like the Angus Chased or whatever, that's like the more commercial variety because it has all the showy colors. Is not great for honeybees, has less nectar than its original Vitex Negundo.
Okay.
Has actually smaller leaves or actual blossoms, less color, but it's better for pollinators.
No, it's interesting.
More nectar.
Okay. That's good to know. So if you didn't hear that, one of the older varieties, sort of the parent plant of the Agnus castus, has more nectar. It's a better pollinator plant. Interesting. All right, y'all. Well, thanks for coming. Thanks for listening. I enjoyed chatting with you.